Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our Think Energy Hub and our Ask the Expert series. Today, I am delighted to be joined by our very own CEO, Donna Gartland, for a conversation that I'm particularly excited about. So just to give you, our viewers, some context to this conversation. So myself and Donna were actually going to be chatting about district heating, but in the midst of discussing this, we also spoke about how many buzzwords and how much jargon there is around the climate crisis and the energy sector. And it's become even more prominent in the run-up to COP26 in Glasgow, which is taking place as we speak. So with that, we made a bit of a pivot. And today we have a selection of buzzwords that we're going to, I suppose, crack open and discuss where possible in plain English. But I think, we need to be having more and more conversations with our friends, our family members, our neighbors, to do that and to make the conversation more accessible, we need to be able to speak in less jargon and in plain English. So there's no point in sitting there just kind of rattling off words like decarbonisation or the energy transition or net zero, when people just want to know, okay, but like, what does that mean for me? How is that going to affect me? Or, just what on earth are you talking about? So that's kind of the premise of our conversation today. But Donna, hello, welcome.
Hello. Yeah. Hi, Katie. How are you?
Good.
Great to chat to you about this. Yeah, as you said, I'm delighted not to be talking about district heating for a change as well, because I'm done. We do so much talk about district heating. It's nice, I suppose, to talk about something different and a bit more, I suppose, more interesting for people as well, because it's a kind of more general topic.
Yeah, exactly. And I suppose more specifically, like, how important do you feel conversations like this are in terms of actually discussing buzzwords and moving beyond that kind of echo chamber that we can kind of get stuck in?
Yeah, I think it's, especially now, as you said, like with COP26 this week, with the climate action plan being released this week, our new government targets, the carbon budgets, all of these things, the kind of real focus on climate action in Ireland now it's in every newspaper, it's on every news channel, it's on every radio station at the moment. So it's still very intangible to most people, because it's like everybody who's worked in the sector for the last 10 years has stored up all of their stuff, and now it's like just spilling it into the media, like to everybody to try and absorb all that. So like for us, we sometimes forget that we need to step back and kind of understand that actually these people that we're speaking to, the public in general, and this is the first time they're hearing a lot of these words. It's the first time they're hearing a lot of these concepts, and a lot of experts on the radio, in the papers, etc., have been working this for a long time, and are just used to using these words. And there hasn't really been, I suppose, a lot of focus on actually breaking them down and that concentration on actually what does it mean for people, like, when you're 100%. Reading the newspaper. Yeah.
And I feel like sometimes as well, some people might be afraid to ask, well, what do you mean? Because you're kind of constantly talking about it, and to kind of put your hand up and say, I actually don't know what you're talking about, can make you quite vulnerable in that situation.
Yes, exactly,
I think it's necessary. And before we get into our list of buzzwords, do you have a particular buzzword or kind of phrase that really grinds your gears?
Well, I suppose just from the energy sector particularly, I get annoyed by people use the word energy interchangeably with electricity. So when they talk about renewable energy, they go on to talk about just renewable electricity, when actually energy is, transport energy, heat energy, and electricity. So yeah, that kind of really annoys me for some reason.
Yeah. Well, I suppose given your background and your experience, you're in it every single day, so that would make sense. For me, I think the buzzword that really grinds my gears is sustainability. I remember like years ago, just when things kind of clicked for me and I really wanted to get more into the environmental movement, sustainability was the absolute buzzword. And I think it just has continued. So people are saying, our new sustainability plan. I'm like, yeah, but does that really mean what you're trying to say? You know what I mean? It's just...
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. I mean, we used to be, our tagline in Codema even used to be Sustainable Dublin, but we actually dropped that and we switched, we moved away from that because the word sustainable and sustainability was becoming so like abstract. that nobody really understood what it meant, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Right. So I think we're going to get cracking. Just so there's some rhyme and reason to the order of our words. We're doing it alphabetically, just so everyone realizes why we're starting with biofuels and biomass. So that is actually the first one. So I've grouped biofuels and biomass together, and they would often be referenced in relation to energy and transport. So can you kind of take us through these in kind of plain English, Donna, please?
As much as possible. Yes. So biomass and biofuels are types of fuels that are derived from organic sources. So from basically anything that was alive, plants, trees, animal waste. And I suppose the word bio is it comes from the biological, and that biological organic kind of waste. That's where the word bio comes from. They're essentially biofuels, biomass, kind of the same thing. But in Irish circles, when we talk about biomass, we generally use biomass to describe solid fuels. So wood, wood logs, wood pellets, and biofuels would be like biodiesel, bioethanol, and kind of liquid would be more liquid fuels. So that's why there's kind of people use them kind of slightly differently.
And then in terms of in Ireland, what would be the most popular, I suppose, from like a biomass perspective? Is it?
It's wood, yeah, wood and wood derivatives. So yeah, from timber, we have wood logs, and there's also like wood chips, wood pellets. You often see, in your local shops now, you'd see kind of wood eco logs that are like the wood chips, sawdust, compacted sawdust together. So that's another kind of solid wood biomass. So we would use wood or wood derivatives would be the biggest one that we'd use in Ireland.
Gotcha. Okay, brilliant. Next one. So building energy rating. So this would often, I know, be referenced in relation to kind of upgrading your home with, to make it more energy efficient. And I've also noticed, being a renter myself, you often see like the BER on kind of a rental listing. So what are we talking about when we say BER?
Yes, so a BER is basically a certificate scheme, and it's a certificate which shows an estimate of the building's annual energy use per meter squared floor area. So, and it's rated on a scale of A to G. So like your products, like your washing machines and your televisions are all go from A to G as well. It's the same scale that's used. So an A1 rated house would have the lowest amount of energy use per meter squared, and say a G rating would have the highest amount of energy use per meter squared for that type of building and for that size of that building.
Okay, that's good to know. And I feel like coming into the winter months, you really get to know what like a D2 feels like. Not speaking from experience or anything.
Yes, if you have a drafty, moldy, condensation filled house, you're kind of generally going to be down at the bottom end of that scale. Yeah, or houses will require a hot water bottle to get through the day. Yes,
that's the situation. Okay, that's brilliant. That's great to know. And then, we're going on to one that I'm excited to chat about, carbon neutral. So this term would definitely be used in referencing kind of climate targets. So I'd say a lot of people would have seen this in the media over the last while in terms of our own national climate targets, in terms of, our aim is to reach carbon neutrality by 2050. But what are we talking about when we say carbon neutral?
So carbon neutral means where you would balance the amount of carbon emitted with carbon reductions. Or offsets, which we'll also explain, because that's also another word. So it's typically where you would reduce your carbon as much as possible, and then whatever is left over, you would offset that or balance it out. So you kind of come to a negative, or a neutral status where you're not, where whatever you're emitting, you're kind of offsetting or reducing it somewhere else. And typically it's achieved by using offsets to reach that kind of zero, kind of neutral
level,
equilibrium kind of level.
Yeah. And I suppose would I be right in saying it's not necessarily the perfect like kind of solution or target, but it's kind of it's the most realistic and what we're going to be able to achieve in the time scale?
Yes, like realistically, we don't, we should be getting, it should be a stage where you're not emitting any carbon. You don't have
carbon
to balance
zero.
So carbon zero, yes, exactly, like zero carbon. rather than a net or a neutral or any of these other words that I use to kind of say, well, I've achieved that balance by buying these offsets or by growing trees or whatever it is to achieve that. So yes, but it's a transition, I suppose, to get into that kind of complete zero, no carbon emitted at all stage.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Okay. So the next one we have here is carbon budgets. So I suppose if our viewers have been following what's been happening nationally, recently, well, literally last week, an independent advisory body to the government, who are known as the Climate Change Advisory Committee, published what are known as carbon budgets. Now, people might be like, but what are you talking about? So yeah, can you take us through carbon budgets?
Yeah, carbon budgets. So if you think about a carbon budget, is just like a financial budget. So if you had your budget for your holiday, say, and you have a certain amount of money to use to go away for that 2-week holiday, so it's the same thing. A carbon budget is, I suppose, a maximum amount of carbon that you have for a set period of time. And I suppose that maximum amount of carbon is sometimes called a carbon ceiling. So that's the most you can kind of emit, say, in that period. In Ireland, the Climate Change Advisory Council have put together carbon budgets for Ireland in a 5-year periods. So we have that amount of carbon that we're allowed, I suppose, to emit in that 5 years.
And that's going to then be spread across sectors, right?
Yes. And they're looking at, I suppose, each sector would have its own, I suppose, carbon allowance, let's say, and that will help to kind of, I suppose, achieve those targets in each sector, because it's important to say it's carbon. This is probably another jargon thing that we probably shouldn't, but it's carbon equivalent. So what that means is, so carbon dioxide is obviously one
greenhouse gas
gas, yes. But there are others, but they can be translated, I suppose, into an equal amount of carbon, a ton of carbon. So it's called, so everything is in the same
bucket.
Everything, yes, exactly. Yeah, everything is referred to as carbon rather than so much carbon, so much methane, so much nitrogen, all the other ones. So yes, it's in tons of carbon equivalent, which means it also takes into account the agricultural sector emissions as well.
Yeah, that's really good. I hadn't put carbon equivalent in there, so thank you for covering that. So now we're on to the controversial one of carbon offsetting. So there's definitely mixed feelings around this one. So what are we talking about when we say we're going to offset carbon?
Yeah, so offsetting is when you reduce carbon somewhere else to compensate for the carbon that you have produced or are responsible for. And this is usually achieved through carbon credits from a accredited or licensed source. So there are lots of players in the market now who offer carbon credits, and these would be achieved through things like where there's proven carbon reductions or savings through things like planting forests, planting trees, switching to renewables, building new renewables, and that kind of thing. It's often done in areas, say, in countries where it's cheaper to reduce carbon. And then those carbons credits are sold to people in maybe more developed world areas where it's more expensive to offset, I suppose, those bits of carbon that we that we can't offset or that we haven't reduced yet.
Yeah. And I feel like, again, it kind of comes hand in hand with carbon neutrality. It's really not perfect, and it's not something we should be relying on.
No.
And people may say it's kind of delaying action in some way, because you're kind of, if you offset something, you're putting it kind of over there and not dealing with it, in the moment. So I think kind of not something to necessarily lean on too heavily.
No, it's a good, again, another it's a transition. It's better than not. It's better than not trying to offset your emissions. Because those projects, there are great projects that are being funded through carbon credits, such as Vita, who are an Irish company who are, have carbon credits that you can buy, say, offset your flights every year or something like that. And they use that for to invest in renewables and low carbon projects in Africa. So there are good benefits of it, but as you say, ideally,
you're doing both.
Yes, yeah. Ideally, you should be doing both.
Yeah. Okay, great. Now we're on to one that is often quite difficult to say. Carbon sequestration.
Yes, it's kind of
one of my favorite with that voice.
Yeah, I kind of like the word sequestration. I don't know why. It's just a nice word to say when you get your tongue around.
Yeah, exactly. So what on earth is it?
It's, if you think about it, it's how it's soaking up. So if you think of sequestration, I was thinking soaking up like a sponge, like that kind of the carbon from the atmosphere through natural kind of ecosystems. So through forests, undisturbed soil, wetlands, that kind of thing. So say like the projects in the Midlands where they're re-wetting the bogs and that kind of thing. That's all sequestration. And if you think about it, like all our soils, our trees take carbon from the atmosphere naturally, so they absorb it in, and they, to grow the bark of the trees, to grow the, everything else, and our soils retain a lot of that as well. So these are natural ways that we can, if we can get those back, or if we can kind of re-wet those bogs, or if we can plant more trees and stuff, we can help to absorb more carbon from the atmosphere.
Brilliant. Yeah. And I suppose, the very thing that we're doing by like cutting down trees or, extracting peatlands is preventing them from being those kind of carbon sinks, or sequestering or soaking up all of the carbon. Yeah. So the next one here we have carbon capture technologies, or carbon capture and storage, another controversial one.
Yes. So these are technologies. They're quite new technologies, so they wouldn't be, I suppose, well advanced then. They're only around the last few years, but they are technologies that capture the carbon from industrial sources before they enter the atmosphere.
Okay.
So they would be, say, in big industries that produce a lot of emissions, carbon emissions would be like, steel manufacturing, cement manufacturing, power production, that use gas and coal and that kind of thing. So these carbon capture technologies would soak soak up the carbon emissions before they go into the atmosphere, and it's compressed and then it's stored permanently underground. So it's a little bit it's a bit like, we have to put that somewhere then, so it has to go somewhere and be stored back underground again somewhere. So a little bit, I suppose, like nuclear waste, but with less less safety concerns. But it has to go somewhere. It's not going to just disappear. So there's a lot of, obviously, it's a high cost, still very, very high cost to do this, and that's why it's not widely used yet. Because it's much cheaper to reduce carbon than to use carbon capture and storage.
And also, I suppose it's one thing that it's still so early on in the kind of development, yet it's something that we are hoping will be in such a place that will aid us in this kind of balancing of carbon neutrality.
Yes, absolutely. Look, it's definitely going to be needed, I think, in any case, but it's definitely, again, something that we can't rely on, and we shouldn't be relying on.
Yeah. Okay, so we're bringing it more nationally to our Climate Action Plan 2019 and 2021, which is due to be released any day now. So what is the Climate Action Plan for Ireland? Just kind of an overview. You don't have to go through all of the however many actions.
So the Climate Action Plan sets out how Ireland will achieve, or hopes to achieve, its climate targets, so its emission reduction targets. I suppose the difference between the 2019 plan and the 2021 plan now that's due to be released is the increase. So the 2019, since 2019, the government has increased our emission reductions target in line with the new programme for government. So since the new government came in, and now the 2021 plan has to reflect that increase, those increased targets. So the 51% carbon greenhouse gas emissions reductions by 2030, that needs to be reflected in this new plan.
Yeah, brilliant. And then the next one we have here is decarbonisation, which I think a lot of us, especially working in the energy sector, would hear a lot. I don't know, have you seen it much in the media? I can't really
Not yet. No, it's a strange one. It kind of popped up out of nowhere. This word decarbonisation, but really, it's just the process of moving away from using carbon, carbon emitting fuels like fossil fuels that produce carbon. I mean, that's the main. That's it. That's really what it is.
It's so funny, isn't it? How like something as simple as like moving away from fossil fuels then becomes decarbonisation and removes all of the sense of like, what exactly are you talking about here? Okay, that's brilliant. So moving away from kind of carbon intensive fuels.
Yes.
Brilliant. Okay, Donna, this is your time to shine.
My favorite topic.
District heating.
District heating. Yes. A very new concept for Ireland, but hopefully we'll gain it should be, we do hope that it will be gaining kind of more publicity, more traction in the future years, because it is a way that we can decarbonize and to get to net zero.
Are you following,
guys? So district heating is widely used across Europe, and what it is an underground network of hot water pipes used to deliver heat to buildings, and just replaces the current oil gas boilers that are in those buildings.
So it's kind of connecting everyone together, so you're not working off this like individual system.
Yes, exactly. So if you think about it, it's, as I say to people, it's the hot water equivalent to electricity. So where you would have your electricity meter in your house and you don't know where that electricity comes in, magic cables bring it in, magic fairies bring it into your house, and you don't have to worry about it. You just have to worry about what you're metered and what you use. District heating is the same. Hot water comes into your house, you have a meter, you don't worry where the magic fairies got the hot water from. You just pay your bill at the end of the day of how much you've used.
Yeah, that sounds dreamy. And we have several projects we're working on at the moment. So we'll make sure to pop those links at the bottom of our YouTube video. And then the next one, which I feel like people may have a handle on, but I think it's a really good one just to reference, energy efficiency. Because I think a lot of people hear of energy savings and these kind of come hand in hand. So energy efficiency is kind of like the place we need to start, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's the easiest thing we can do to reduce our emissions, and it's just reducing energy as far as possible. You're reducing your energy use as far as possible. So that's like turning off things when they're not being used, using more efficient technologies, those A-rated appliances, for example, or making your home A-rated. All of these things are energy efficiency measures that will help you to be more energy efficient.
Yeah. And I found one that helped me get my head around it as well as like, you insulate your home so you're not heating the street. Like that's so inefficient to be having your heaters on. So then you're going to use more heat to try and get that feeling of being warm, but most of it is going out through your walls. So that's kind of an example of an energy efficiency measure.
Yeah, people don't see energy. I mean, it's not, if you could see the heat leaving your house out the walls and everything, like, people would really be able to, it would be more tangible. So that's why it's quite difficult. Like, and that's why we try and use those things like, those kind of, or like when you see the red lights on your TV or whatever, that, there's energy being used when it's in standby, etc. So it's trying to get people to, it's a difficult one because you don't see where the energy is being wasted necessarily.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. But I suppose if you use our home energy saving kits, then you can.
Absolutely, available in your local library.
Exactly. So the next one here is kind of more of a broader, I suppose, like top level talk, which would be like when we talk about, the European Union's or the EU's energy transition or the global energy transition. What are we talking about when we say that?
Well, an energy transition is moving away from the current way of using and supplying energy and switching to a new normal, if you know what I mean.
Okay.
So, and our new normal would be, I suppose, what we talk about is lower energy use, renewable energy, a low carbon energy transition. Mm-hmm. It's often shortened to just an energy transition, but what we would mean would be a low carbon energy transition.
Brilliant. Yeah, because I remember, so we recently did a survey and we had initially, like we were talking about Dublin's energy transition. And then we realized we're like, but let's just say what we mean, which is to move Dublin away from fossil fuels, So that's basically what we're kind of talking about. And speaking of, what are fossil fuels?
What are fossil fuels? Fossil fuels, I was joking, mashed down dinosaurs. Compressed dinosaurs.
I mean, you're not wrong. Let's be honest.
Not wrong. There are a few other bits and pieces thrown in there as well. But I suppose it's fossil fuels are fossils. I mean, the word is in the name. So any organic material that has been fossilized and squashed down, compressed for millions of years under the ground, turn into gases and liquids like oil and gas, and then we take them back out of the ground. And because they have so much of that organic material squashed together, there's lots and lots of carbon in there, lots of energy in there, and they're very an energy dense resource. So that's why we get lots of energy when we use oil and gas and stuff like that for the amount that's there. So that's what fossil fuels are basically.
That's great. And I think a natural kind of addition to that is what they produce, which is greenhouse gas emissions. So when we're talking about greenhouse gas emissions, what are we including in that?
So greenhouse gas emissions are emissions that are released into the atmosphere that specifically cause global warming or increased global temperatures or climate change. So this is, and that's what the word greenhouse comes from, that greenhouse effect. So it's the warming of the planet. And the main ones from human activities would be the burning of fossil fuels that produces carbon dioxide, and methane from agriculture. They'd be the two biggest greenhouse gas emission sources.
And carbon dioxide stays in the atmosphere longer, but methane is more potent but leaves more quickly, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So methane doesn't hang around long enough as long. But is very strong. It's a bit like, I suppose, when you think about where methane comes from, the burps and the farts that again, if you think about it like that, like strong, potent for a short amount of time. Like nobody wants that there for a short amount of time, but then it leaves after a little while. But carbon hangs around for a longer period of time.
That's a good description. Okay, moving on to, I have here the grid. So I think this can be a difficult one to get your head around, and I know it's definitely not often that we actually really think about where, like you were saying, where our electricity comes from, but we know it comes from the grid. And I think this has definitely become more top of mind for people, especially with the media talking about potential blackouts this winter. So what are we talking about when we talk about the grid?
The grid is, so a grid is a network of cables or pipes that transport energy from a supply source to a customer, and typically over long distances. So in Ireland, it's mostly used when referring to the electricity grid. So obviously the cables and the pylons, and they move the electricity electrons from the sources, which are your wind turbines, your power plants, and it comes all the way down, and you can see little wires coming into your house and then down into your meter, and that's basically how it connects all of these systems. That we have a national grid that's run by EirGrid, and that connects everything together and makes sure that everything works properly, and we don't get blackouts and we don't get those kind of things. But there are also other grids. So when people do say the grid, they do generally refer to electricity, but there are also gas grids, like district heating grids, like we talked about, hot water grids, water grids, your freshwater grid. So they're all grids also that can also be referred to.
It is amazing, isn't it, how all of that's happening around us, and we're just going about our day, turning on our light switch, turning on our tap, and just, like, let's be honest, taking it for granted. And there's this whole system that's working underneath us and around us.
Yeah, exactly. And I suppose it's a lovely convenience for us to have, and it does mean that, I suppose, the benefit of having a big grid like the electricity grid and that controlled centrally, it means that we can integrate, and we have been very successful at integrating lots of renewables onto that grid, because again, I don't have to think about it, you don't have to think about it, I'm not making it, those kind of choices every day. That's all controlled by the very intelligent people who control and balance the grid, and work out all that stuff for on our behalf. And that's I suppose another reason why things like district heating grids are very essential, are great ways of integrating lots of renewables, because again, you can plug lots of different renewables onto this network of hot water pipes, and you don't have to worry about, switching your boiler or switching whatever else. That's all just done for you somewhere. The magic fairies look after it.
Don't worry about it. Magic fairies have got it sorted. Brilliant. So then moving on to, we have now, we're on our alphabet, but I've also put in a sneakily and adaptation. So we've got mitigation and adaptation. So Both of these terms are often used together, especially in relation to kind of climate action plans, but they mean very different things. So what are we talking about when we talk about mitigation and adaptation?
Yeah, so they're very common words used. So mitigation would be mitigating the sources of climate change. So that would be stopping emissions, stopping our impact of greenhouse gas emissions going into the atmosphere. So reducing, our energy efficiency, renewable energy, all those kind of will be mitigation actions. So stopping or slowing down climate change. And adaptation is adapting our systems and our way of living around the effects of climate change. So flooding, our effects on our food production, that kind of thing. It's adapting to the new, I suppose, climate that as a consequence of climate change.
Yeah. So again, they do kind of need to go hand in hand, but of course, mitigation is extremely important. But the reality is, the climate crisis is here, and we are going to be experiencing the effects of it. So adaptation is really important.
Absolutely, yes, absolutely. Nobody wants to have to canoe down to work, or
no.
Cycling is already treacherous enough.
Oh my gosh, exactly.
Canoeing to work wouldn't be fun.
Not great.
No.
So on to now, this actually kind of goes hand in hand with carbon neutrality, but it is another buzzword that's used a lot, which is net zero. So when we're talking about net zero, we're not talking about zero, like absolute zero. We're talking about that net again. So
yes, they are kind of used interchangeably, I suppose, net zero and carbon neutral. But I suppose people would use net zero more often when there's more of a focus on emissions reductions first, instead of just a simple offset. That seems to be the kind of, I would use them very interchangeably, without kind of, I suppose, paying too much attention to the difference. But some people would say that net zero is more focused on actually trying to reduce them as much as possible and then only offsetting, whereas carbon neutral, you're kind of, there's not so much focus maybe on the actual, eliminating the reduction as much as, eliminating the emissions as much as possible. But essentially, as you say, it's the net, it's the balance. So I'm still emitting, but I'm saving, whereas it's not like I'm not emitting anything. So it's not zero.
Yeah, because I suppose actually that's a good point, because I suppose, like, let's say an organization says they're carbon neutral, technically they could still be emitting greenhouse gas emissions, but just offsetting them. Whereas what you're saying with net zero, it's kind of more of a check on actually reducing your emissions, but then balancing the remaining.
Exactly. It's only what's the kind of the really hard to reach or unavoidable carbon emissions then.
Okay. Oh, that's good. That's cool. That's good to know. Your favorite, renewable energy.
Renewable energy. We're all about it. So renewable energy then is energy that comes from sources that are naturally renewable, come from natural, from the planet, that can naturally reproduce. So so obviously we, the sun hopefully doesn't go anywhere soon.
Fingers crossed.
Yes, fingers crossed. So solar energy, the wind is constant, wind energy, and geothermal energy, so the heat that's in the ground. We have renewable energy also comes from things like the biofuels or the biomass that we talked about earlier. So that's termed renewable because if you can utilize it now and then you can regrow, so it can regenerate. So it's kind of like an infinite, I suppose, source of energy rather than a finite source like fossil fuels.
Yes. And then to a word that I only really got my head around in the last year, which is retrofitting. So, for example, just to put this in the context of kind of climate action, the Climate Action Plan in 2019 set a target of retrofitting 500,000 homes to a BER, which we now know of B2. So when we say retrofitting, what are we talking about?
So in this sector, when we talk about retrofitting, we talk about what's, I suppose, energy retrofitting.
Yes.
And that's about increasing the energy efficiency of a building through a retrofit, which would include like new materials, new windows, I suppose, upgrading the building fabric, which is the outside. So the fabric was like anything that the roof, the walls, the windows, the doors, all that bit. The
cardboard box.
So all the outside bits. And also retrofitting things that would help you reduce your energy, so new boilers and more energy efficient boilers or heat pumps, like that kind of thing, which are more efficient. So retrofitting is what we call it. Retrofitting is energy retrofitting.
Yeah, exactly. And I think I remember SAI said that they've recently done research where retrofitting doesn't really resonate as much with the public as home energy upgrades.
Yeah.
So that's like a really simple way of thinking about it. So if you ever hear retrofitting, just think of an energy upgrade in your home. So that could be wall insulation, heat pump, attic insulation, all that kind of stuff. That was a helpful one for me too. And then the last one, I mean, of course, we have probably 50 others that we could talk about, but we understand that people have, busy days, and this is a quick whistle stop tour. Very gesticulating here today. So the last one is waste heat.
Waste heat, yes. Waste heat is heat that is an unavoidable byproduct of a process. So, for example, when you put your dinner on in the oven, you set it at a certain temperature, 180. Everything seems to cook at 180.
It does, yeah.
Just no other temperature needed. I don't know why it comes with other temperatures. But your chicken will obviously cook at whatever 180 degrees. But when that when you open the oven door, all that heat comes out, and there's heat that has to be. Your fans are going to get rid of that heat, and after the oven's finished, and it stays quite warm afterwards. So there's all that temperature from 180 degrees down is then wasted and thrown away. Like once it's not used. So that's like a mini version of what happens in big industrial processes. So when we burn gas, for example, in power plants, to produce electricity. Even the most efficient power plants out there will only be about 40% efficient. So the other 60% is mostly waste heat that we throw away, because the gas that we burn has to be at a really high temperature, has to get that really high temperature to turn a turbine to make the electricity. Okay. So that's at hundreds of degrees. And then obviously anything below that, it's not high enough a temperature to actually produce the steam to produce the electricity. So that all the rest of that has to get thrown away because there's no use for it anymore. So what we want to try and do then is, and what they do in a lot of places, is utilize that heat that's been thrown away instead of burning more gas and more fossil fuels to produce more heat somewhere slightly, just over here. So so that's what waste heat is. It's unavoidable, I suppose, heat that we throw away currently.
And that we can capture and use, which is quite exciting.
Very importantly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And one other source of what might be interesting as well people is like data centers. So data centers actually produce a lot of heat, waste heat. It's at a much lower temperature. But if people want to think about how that works, is I suppose data centers are just like loads and loads of computers. So if you ever had your laptop on your lap and you've noticed how warm your lap gets and the fan starts humming, exactly. So imagine that by a million inside a data center, and they have to obviously get rid of that heat because they don't want the computers to overheat, and so that gets pushed out at the other side by fans, and we want to capture that then and utilize that as well. That's another kind of source of waste heat.
Brilliant. That's great. And those examples are really helpful as well. So, I mean, that's it, Donna. We've reached the end of our list.
We've done an A to W.
Say that again?
We've done an A to W.
It was speedy. But I think we could definitely keep going, probably for another hour. But I think there's a lot there and a lot to absorb. And just to say, for anyone who might take in information a little better when it's written down, a little like myself, we're going to make Donna's definitions, which I actually quite like. It's just like a thing. Donna's definitions. I feel like that sounds good. We're going to make that into a blog post, and it'll be available just to refer back to time and time again, just as a refresher. So Donna, thank you so much for your time and for busting some jargon with us. This will be our little like terminology, like but yes, and thank you all so much for watching. Please make sure to subscribe to our channel and follow us at Codema Dublin on Twitter, and keep an eye on our website codema.ie for events, energy saving tips, and just general updates. So thank you all so much.